Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, and in this Regained Telecom video we're going to be discussing and analysing tech news which as usual has pumped up over the past 24 or so hours. And we're going to start things out with the next generation Xbox versus Sony's PlayStation 5, because there is a lot of chatter at the moment online that the next generation Xbox will indeed be more powerful than Sony's PS5 system. Just a couple of days ago, Mark Cerny made a set of announcements regarding the next generation PlayStation's specifications, although it is important to note that technically he did not call it the PlayStation 5 or PS5. Instead, he consistently referred to it as next gen. But let's all be honest, it's highly unlikely that they would call it anything other than the PS5. He confirmed several details of the system. He confirmed that it was going to have a Zen 2 based CPU with 8 processor cores. He confirmed it was going to be a next generation GPU based on AMD's Navi architecture, but did say that it also has some additional features, we'll get into that in a moment, plus ray tracing. He confirmed that there was going to be 3D audio support, there was going to be an extremely fast SSD, and a few other bits and pieces. There were some critical details missing though: the number of T-flops of the system, the actual clock speed of the CPU, the clock speed of the GPU, and just, well, a lot of pertinent information, including even memory specifications. But there have been a number of leaks online, including a rather compelling pastebin entry. Now, the pastebin entry is really interesting because it actually predated Cerny's interview. And the specifications that we have from the pastebin entry really closely match to what has been confirmed with the next generation system from Sony. Although apparently the number of T-flops of the PS5 are still up in the air. Meanwhile, Microsoft is said to have 2 systems in the works. One is going to be a cheaper entry, which is going to be a little bit like the Xbox One S, and the other is going to be known as Anaconda, which is considerably more powerful, but obviously more expensive. And basically this means that Microsoft are going to continue its dual ecosystem like they have with the Xbox One X and the Xbox One S. So can Microsoft have a more powerful system than Sony? Well, I was involved in several Twitter conversations recently where industry insiders were telling us that their sources had confirmed that Microsoft did have a more powerful console. There was a leak back in January of this year, 2019, and the Lockhart, which is once again the cheaper model, is going to retail at around $250. It is going to have an 8-core CPU, a 4 teraflop GPU, 12 gigabytes of memories, and a 1 terabyte SSD, and also DirectX ray tracing support. Meanwhile, the other system is going to retail at around $500, and its GPU is going to be hitting around the 12 teraflop range, and also increases the amount of RAM. It's going to have 16 gigabytes. Now you'll notice a very interesting thing. The amount of RAM here for the next generation Xbox, the Anaconda, is listed as 16 gigabytes of memory, which is less than what the PlayStation 5 will actually sport. The administrator of Reset Era forums by the name of Nibble confirmed that a user by the name of Clobril, hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, sent him a message. He couldn't elaborate on it for security reasons. Most likely, if it was a legit message, he didn't want anyone to get fired because of it, because it's probably had NDA information up the wazoo. But he said that it did appear to be legitimate to the best of his knowledge, and Clobril was alleging that yes, the next generation Xbox, known as Anaconda anyway, would be more powerful than what Sony's PlayStation 5 would be. Now, we don't know whether this is a legitimate leak or not, but supposedly it's from an Anaconda development kit. And there are several really interesting things that we can discern from this dump, once again assuming it's legit. So the first is that the CPU is indeed 8 cores, but with SMT disabled, it's using hyperscheduler. I'll go more into what hyperscheduling is in a future video because it's slightly outside the scope and of a news video / light analysis video. There's also a level 4 cache. If I had to take a guess here, it's most likely some type of high bandwidth memory. Speaking of memory, if you look at the bottom of the screen, you can see that there's a core clock of 1400 megahertz, but with a memory clock speed of 1650 megahertz, 64 Arcturus engines with a total number of unified shaders of 4,096 and a memory speed of 22 gigabytes. I'm not 100% certain whether I believe this leak, and the 1400 megahertz and other clock speeds we're seeing here are possibly because it is an early prototype. If you actually take the 1400 megahertz of the GPU clock, multiply it by the 4096 shaders, and then times it by 2 because there's 2 operations per clock with AMD's architecture, assuming it's same here, and I would be surprised if it isn't, you're looking well shy of 12 T-flops of GPU performance. But then we have seen both engineering sample and qualification sample APUs, which are almost certainly from Sony's PlayStation 5 as well, pop up, and you can actually see that the engineering samples back in January, I think it was late January, if memory serves, only had a clock speed of around 1 gigahertz for the GPU clock, but the qualification samples that we're now seeing are running at around the 1800 megahertz mark. So it's certainly possible that this is an early prototype development kit of the next generation Xbox. Ultimately though, the thing to remember is that both companies do use AMD for their hardware. And this is really important because Microsoft cannot ask AMD, hey, how many T-flops and, other performance metrics are Sony aiming for with the PlayStation 5? They just cannot do it. It would be, illegal on so many different levels for AMD to reveal that information. However, assuming they don't have sources inside Sony, which I'm not saying they do, or, eager game developers kind of talking amongst themselves and accidentally letting something slip, which is possible, even, if they had to kind of ballpark the figure, they could figure out what Sony were aiming for with the system, because they know that Sony most likely don't want to sell the PlayStation 5 above, let's say, $399 or $499 US dollars. They also know that Sony probably don't want to have more than $100 lost per console. That's the rumor anyway. So what they can do is look at AMD's roadmap. They also know that it needs to fit into a small form factor, in other words, a console size system. And they also need to hit certain power targets, certain heat targets because of that. And because, once again, both companies are using AMD's roadmaps, then they could kind of get an idea of what Sony would be doing. And maybe that's why Microsoft has chosen 2 Xboxes for the next generation system, because they are knowing. Maybe that's why Microsoft are choosing this strategy of 2 Xboxes for the next generation. Maybe that's why Microsoft are choosing 2 Xboxes for the next generation of consoles, because that way they know that their yields are not going to be amazing for Anaconda. I'm just using an example here, but let's say at best they have 70% yields for Anaconda, or 70% of APUs they create would be usable for Anaconda, and therefore the remainder of those could be used for Lockhart. That's one possibility, or maybe their yields are even worse than that. But obviously we don't know enough technical details about the APU to know whether the APU of Anaconda would be usable in Lockhart. That's just speculation on my part. And even if the 2 APUs from Sony and Microsoft are essentially identical, Microsoft could just be willing to go with higher clock speeds, which once again means that their yields would be lower than what Sony have. There's also the customization question. Unfortunately, we don't know what customization Microsoft are asking to implement into the silicon, and we don't know much of the customization that Sony are implementing for the PlayStation 5. We know that Navi 10 is going to launch this year, and the leaks and rumours are that Navi 10 Lite is going to be found in the PlayStation 5. However, ray tracing is said to be part of the PlayStation 5 as well. Mark Cerny said this. From my sources, ray tracing is going to be part of Navi 20, which is the larger Navi-based GPU which launches next year. However, you will also notice that from Mark Cerny and the Pastebin leaks and some other bits and bobs that apparently the PlayStation 5 GPU does have some features of future GPUs that aren't necessarily the Navi that will launch this year for PC. So that combined with Sony's own customizations are nothing new. We've seen the same thing for the original PlayStation 4, which had things such as volatile bit and increased compute queue compared to the available GCN GPUs that were available from AMD at the time for desktop. Another compelling piece of evidence actually is not to do with the hardware itself, but from Brad Sims, who works over at Forret.com, and he's a well-known Microsoft insider. According to him, so far Microsoft earmarked over $500 million for the next generation Halo's development, which makes it the most expensive video game thus far created, because this is not even including marketing and stuff yet, which is absolutely insane. According to Brad, it's one of those things where people at the studio are really excited because, that is an amazing budget, but also kind of nervous because it's like, well, if this game doesn't do well, our careers are not going to be doing so well, right? I mean, imagine you create a dud and your budget has been like $500 million. You can't really explain that of being budget limited, right? You can't just be like, well, we didn't have enough environmental artists and that's why all the trees look the same. You can't do that. So obviously Microsoft are expecting a really good return, and it's not just like, oh, this game has to sell a lot of copies. It has to convince people that, well, to step in, to jump in, see what I did there, with the Xbox ecosystem, although it will, of course, be released on PC as well. And that kind of brings us to the almost conclusion of this video. Ultimately, the performance of the systems is still up for grabs. No one really knows which of the two consoles is going to be more powerful. Either Sony or Microsoft really have the capability of producing the more powerful system. With that said, from a very non-tech perspective for a second, Microsoft just have more cash. So Microsoft, technically speaking, if they really wanted to, they could afford to lose much more money per system sold than what Sony do. And the other thing that's interesting about that standpoint as well, or that thought process, is that from what I remember, Sony actually have a lower attach rate than what Microsoft do when it comes to buying DLC and stuff. So it's going to be really interesting to see which of the two companies come on top. I would encourage you to comment down below to think, which of the systems you think is going to be more powerful. But it really comes down to games. Microsoft dropped the ball this generation. Crackdown was not as good as what I was hoping, to be honest. I didn't really have major hopes for the game, and then I just completely lost interest. Sunset Overdrive was pretty cool. We've had Gears of War. Halo's was really awesome, and to Microsoft's credit, the Halo collection is really cool. And so on and so on. But they obviously cancelled Scalebound. We've seen Sony really hit out the park with several amazing titles, including The Last of Us 2, which is going to be released soon. But we've also had Spider-Man, God of War. It's been an amazing couple of years for Sony exclusives. But Microsoft are said to be giving their studios, the ones they've acquired and the ones they currently already had, a lot of budget for producing the best titles possible. So it's going to be really interesting to see what all of these studios are capable of bringing to the table. And I personally think that this year, for E3 anyway, is going to be Microsoft. They have to convince everyone that they are here to play. So yeah, hopefully you'll join me. With all of that said, hopefully you have enjoyed the video. Once again, do subscribe if you want a lot more technical analysis. I'm currently about halfway through the research and scripting of a really in-depth PlayStation 5 video, and I think you're all going to absolutely love it. It's going to be going through the GPU, ray tracing importance, it's going to be going through CPUs, it's going to be going through a lot of architecture information, some leaks as well. It's going to be absolutely awesome, at least in my opinion. And then, of course, we're going to subsequently follow that up with Xbox stuff and a lot more besides. So do stick with us here at RGT if you want that information. With all of that said, you can also find us down below on the social medias along with Patreon if you so desire to donate. That would be amazing. Or if you want to purchase a couple of games or something, or a new toothbrush, you can find some Amazon affiliate links down below as well. With all of that said, hope you have an amazing day. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now.